JJ, I want to start with this. So, on the show throughout the week, I've been talking about this explosive Duke offense, but it didn't really all seem to come together until last week against NC State, where they put up over 40 points, didn't turn the ball over. So, JJ, how was Duke able to have everything come together on offense last week?
Feels like such a simple answer to give you, Jackson, but you just kind of gave it to me right there. They didn't turn the football over. They were able to hold on to it and finally capitalize and finish off drives the right way. Previous games this season, Duke was not doing that. There were fumbles. There were interceptions that Darian Mensah was throwing. And finally, when you get to Saturday's game that we saw against NC State, Duke took care of the football and were able to end drives by scoring touchdowns. And anytime you're able to do that, you're going to feel a whole lot better about what you can accomplish throughout the course of a game and that sort of thing. The stats have been there for Darian Mensah through 4 weeks of the season. But up until that NC State game, you would always be able to say, yeah, but there was an interception, or yeah, but there were a couple of fumbles that he had. That was not the case at all this past Saturday, and Duke really benefited from that.
Awesome. And for Syracuse, it all also seemed to come together against Clemson, right? They get out to a huge lead. They, of course, had the onside kick. But I think the biggest key in all of that is Syracuse against Clemson was able to run the football. And they did it pretty much right off the bat. I think they caught Clemson a little bit off guard. Syracuse's bread and butter is their short passing game. And they came out running their first 5 plays of the game. They got all the way down deep into Clemson territory. And then from then on, once Syracuse established a run against Clemson, it was game over for that seemingly talented Clemson defense. We don't know if they're still talented or not. I guess we'll find out the rest of the season. But on paper, they still seem pretty talented. But Syracuse was able to have its way on offense. But of course, JJ, I'm sure you're well aware of what's going on with Syracuse right now. How do you think Duke is going to defend a backup quarterback in Rickie Collins, of course, filling in for Steve Angeli the rest of the year after he suffered a torn Achilles?
Well, yeah, that's a big ask. I mean, I know that the injury took place in the Clemson game, so Collins comes in and there's a little bit of tape that's out there on them. But when you're watching the 2025 Syracuse Orange play football, the overwhelming majority of it, Duke's going to be watching a quarterback who's injured and not able to go. So I feel confident in Manny Diaz being a defensive-minded head coach and the defense that Duke has been able to put together over the past couple of seasons with him and defensive coordinator Jonathan Packey figuring out some type of game plan. But I think it's going to remain consistent to what they've done over the last couple of seasons. Last year, this was a Duke team that finished top 2 in the country in both sacks and tackles for loss. I think they'll be very aggressive around the ends defensively and try to make the game as difficult as possible for Rickie Collins. I mean, is that what Syracuse is banking on in your eyes? Is that, hey, you know, everybody's watching our team so far this year and there's not as much tape on this guy because it's been so much of the injured quarterback now at this point?
I mean, I guess, that's definitely a silver lining is that sometimes you will see, and no matter what level of football, when the backup quarterback comes in, a defense gets a little bit thrown off guard because it's just not the same guy. And you're watching tape on a different player and you're going up against someone who's different. And Rickie Collins is different than Steve Angeli. Sometimes you'll see teams have a backup quarterback that is essentially a facsimile of their starter. A great example, if you go into the NFL with the Washington Commanders, right? Jaden Daniels is the starter. The backup is Marcus Mariota. You'd probably sit there and say they're sort of similar.
Right.
The way they play. They have a similar archetype. Steve Angeli is a pocket passer who can sometimes use his legs. Rickie Collins is a lot more mobile, but I don't know if he has necessarily he has a big arm, but I don't know if he has the same arm accuracy as a guy like Steve Angeli. So Duke, Syracuse fan like myself, I don't necessarily know exactly what to expect from Rickie Collins in the Syracuse offense. My best guess is that it's going to be similar, but there's going to be some wrinkles in there for Rickie Collins. I would expect a lot of option plays and really, especially early, trying to get that running game involved, because if they can get the running game going, all of a sudden you sucker in that Duke defense a little bit, you get them to load the box. Next thing you know, it can open up the intermediate to deep range passing game. JJ, when it comes to the Duke defense, what do you think is the number one player that they're going to try to stop given the weapons that Syracuse has?
I think it'd be, wise to start at that quarterback spot for Syracuse, right? To force him to be able to make plays with, the wide receivers and running back. And that if you can hone in on a quarterback, it's going to make the job that much easier for your entire team. You mentioned kind of the more mobile dynamic that Collins has for this Syracuse team. If you're forcing him to make throws, maybe they are off target and you're forcing Duke to go out and make a play defensively. This is a Duke team that prior to the Tulane game hadn't forced a turnover all season. And in that Tulane game for Duke also turned over the football. So they were still in the negative turnover margin department. It wasn't until this past week when Duke was able to finally get a couple of interceptions that they were able to pick off an opposing quarterback. It took them nearly 16 quarters of football to accomplish that feat, but finally they came through. So when you're talking about stopping guys defensively, I think if you can make the quarterback as uncomfortable as possible, there's only so much you can do if you're a wide open wide receiver. You can get open, but you can't always control the ball getting to you. So reversing that question kind of back towards you, Jackson, who are those wide receivers for Syracuse for the Duke fans to hear about that are hopeful the football can find their hands?
Well, fortunately, Syracuse does have an abundance of weapons, and they've proven that over the past year plus, ever since this new coaching staff has really taken over, and they've done it with different personnel. So this year, they have Justice Ross Simmons, who was with the team last year, but in a lesser role, and that wasn't really his fault. He was injured for most of the season, or really wasn't injured for most of the season, but by the time he got back healthy, too little, too late with the amount of weapons that had already emerged on the offense. Now he's here. He's healthy. Definitely a big option for Syracuse. Had 2 touchdowns last week against Clemson. You also got Jonte Cook, an explosive wide receiver from Texas and Washington that they got in the transfer portal this offseason. He had a 59-yard catch against Clemson. He's someone you definitely have to keep an eye on. You also got Darryl Gill, another player who can take the top off the defense. I believe he's currently top 5 in the ACC in receiving yards, and I don't even know if he's their number one option. But the guy that I'm really looking at, and I think Duke should look at very early in this game, is the security blanket in Dan Villari. Dan Villari is the tight end, breakout player for Syracuse this year, a veteran. So happy for him that he was finally able to emerge and really establish himself as an all-conference caliber player.
I mean,
if you're Duke, that's the security blanket for Rickie Collins. More often than not, when Dan Villari catches a pass, there is nobody within the vicinity of him. He's just wide open. So if I'm Duke, that's the guy that I'm looking at, especially early in this game, because if you could take away Dan Villari, all of a sudden, those matchups on the outside, perhaps a guy like Chandler Rivers, he can make an impact play for Duke. And next thing you know, to your point about making Rickie Collins, you can make him a little bit uncomfortable.